Hi guys and
Okay,
welcome
no problem.
back. Today we have here on the call Joseph Agur. Hi Joseph.
Hi, Fran. How are you?
Very good, thank you. So Joseph and I have worked together also when I was in India. He helped me a lot with my diet and my macro distribution when I was in India. That things were not the easy as now here in Europe in terms of like finding the right food for bodybuilding and he helped me a lot to find the right sources in order to hit my protein quota in particular. And now I re-engage with Joe now that I'm 12 weeks out. Just to have his tips and his recommendation also now to handle my diet and my nutrition now that we are getting closer to the competition. And today, everybody should know Joe, but I let you just introduce yourself maybe to the public, and then we can kick off with the questions. Just please go ahead.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me on, Fran. It's my name's Joseph Agu. I'm a nutrition consultant, and my company is Elite Nutrition Coaching. So that's elitenutritioncoaching.com. To give you a bit of background on myself, I studied a degree in sports science at the University of Chester in England and graduated in 2010. Followed that up a year later with a master's in sports nutrition. And between then and now, I've worked at the English Institute of Sport, based in Loughborough, working with British athletics. And over the past sort of 2 to 3 years, I've been taking on clients privately, from your average gym goer right through to elite athletes and bodybuilders, other physique competitors, and so on. Yeah, and that's where we are now.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much, Joe. And it's been a pleasure. To work with you. Since the beginning, you've been very approachable, very helpful as well in giving some good tips. Also, especially when I was in India, as I say, because we have different time zones, but you were always very available and very helpful with all your recommendations. And today, I would like to talk to you about, I would like to have your take on the topic of vegan diet and bodybuilding. As you know, when I approached you the first time, I explained to you that I turned vegan 1 year ago. I
Yeah.
competed as a bodybuilder 14 times before that, and been training for 20 years. So I would say that I'm not a novice bodybuilder, so I'm pretty used to step on stage. But of course, I wanted to have your consultation and your expertise on kind of the vegan diet in order to achieve my best condition for the next show this year. So I'm competing this year at the NGA Universe in Coral Springs in Florida on the 11th of November. And again, last year I prepared for the Arnold Classic Europe by myself. Of course, following kind of some readings from Eric Helms and your papers as well about how to prepare and how to achieve best condition for the peak week. But this year, I just wanted to have your kind of a expert opinion on how to manage my preparation. And
Yeah.
again, vegan diet and bodybuilding is kind of sometimes a binomial that doesn't really kind of resonate with a lot of people. Some vegans I've seen as been seen as people who just eat grass and they don't eat protein. So where do you get your protein from? And
Yeah.
again, I'd like to have your take as an expert nutritionist on vegan and bodybuilding, and then maybe we can start taking from there.
Yeah, so my thoughts generally on it is, yeah, that obviously people have got different preferences of eating, whether that's sort of ethically driven or purely through preference. So oftentimes people are not going to consume specific types of food because of those reasons. So and in general, the sort of fewer foods someone can consume, the more difficult it's going to be to fit in the required sort of macronutrients, the micronutrients, and so on. And if pretty much all dietary approaches, veganism, apart from some of the hardcore branches of veganism. It's one of the most difficult sort of dietary practices to fit in a lot of those nutrients. So it still can be done, although the person's got to work extremely hard to ensure that they are meeting those certain requirements, which we'll get to soon, such as like protein, calcium, B12, and things like that. But in terms of the potential for a vegan versus a non-vegan bodybuilder, I don't think the diet's going to be a limiting factor, providing that they are sort of well educated and know what they're doing, they're diligent, and they are making sure that they're covering their bases within those different nutrients. So if we get on to protein, so like you say, people, this general response to vegans is, where do you get your protein from? And obviously there's tons of plant-based protein sources. So there's like oats, peas, lentils, soy, potatoes, rice, maize, sort of spirulina, all that type of those type of foods. And one commonality amongst those foods, though, is that generally the absorption rate is lower than most animal-based protein sources. So it's around 85 to 90% that you're going to absorb in terms of the protein. So if you're consuming 100 grams of a lot of plant-based sources, you might only absorb 80 to 90 grams of those, whereas something like chicken or beef it's going to be close to 100, around 97 to 99% is going to be absorbed. And another challenge as well is the amino acid profile of vegetarian and vegan sources of protein. So the main amino acid that's responsible for sort of anabolism, or the initiation of muscle protein synthesis, is leucine, and most plant-based sources of protein are fairly low in leucine in comparison to stuff like dairy proteins like whey, casein, and then in sort of animal flesh-based proteins like chicken, beef, fish, and so on. So the leucine content is probably around 6 to 8% in most plant-based sources, where in an animal-based it's usually around sort of 7 to all the way up to 12%. So that's the main limitation. So the way of overcoming that essentially is either you can eat more of that protein to ensure that you're getting enough, it's in your daily protein targets, or you can essentially artificially correct the amino acid profile of a given protein. So if say you're eating some tofu, what you could do is before you eat that tofu containing meal is to take a couple of grams of leucine, which is going to give you that sort of 3 gram threshold of leucine then to maximize protein synthesis. And when you take that leucine, essentially what happens is when you consume the protein following that's going to be used as the sort of building blocks of that new muscle protein. So they're generally my comments on protein. The other amino acids are lysine and methionine are generally lacking in vegetarian sources. Plus, a lot of plant-based protein sources are incomplete. There are exceptions, like quinoa is a complete one. But a way of overcoming that is just to mix different protein sources, and as long as you're consuming different ones throughout the day, that's not going to be a massive issue. And like meat eaters anyway, like carnivores, people with higher protein requirements like bodybuilders and physique competitors and just athletes in general are quickly going to realize that it's going to be extremely difficult to hit their protein requirements purely from whole food proteins. So supplementation is going to be a necessity, and in terms of plant-based sources, so you've got like soy isolates, you've got pea proteins, there's maize, rice-based proteins, and so on. You'll know more of the varieties than me, but there are plenty of options out there now, and because veganism is getting quite popular, there's a lot more information, so people can make those more informed choices of where to get those protein foods from. because a lot of times when someone adopts a vegan diet, what they tend to do is just remove all animal-based foods and don't replace those with anything. So, and that's where a lot of the issues come in with the veganism. So, if someone isn't quite vegan yet, was thinking about it, I think it's worth having a conversation with someone who knows what they're doing in terms, so they can replace those and fill those gaps within their diet.
Yeah. I mean, what I found also is that because I've been competing for many years and being kind of in the bodybuilding industry for quite a while, I always paid a kind of extra attention to the food that I put in my mouth, and even when I turned vegan, I always went for kind of the best sources of food, like whole food, instead of, I mean, one of the typical mistakes that many people do is when they turn vegan, they always try to find shoot for like meat alternatives or meat surrogates. So they go for all these soya burger, soya röstel, soya currywurst. And there are plenty of places like this also here in Berlin. And, that's not probably the type of kind of a vegan diet that, I kind of admire or that I kind of recommend to my clients as well. I mean, what I usually go for is like a 100% plant-based vegan diet. So, I try to, like, 90% of my food is actually coming from plant-based food, so legume, pulses, and then lots of vegetables. I do have like tempeh or tofu or like fermented soya beans. But also for soya, I mean, I try not to exaggerate with protein, soya protein servings, because I know that one of the other biggest mistake is, soy is a complete protein, vegetable protein, so I just have soya every day. Well, again, there are many more other legumes, many more other pulses that you can have, and cereals, and other complete protein, like as you say, like quinoa, amaranth, spirulina, and then hemp seeds, that you can really kind of enjoy your food without just going only with one source only. Yeah,
and I think as well, because the risk of deficiencies in certain nutrients is massively enhanced with a plant-based diet, having quite a one-dimensional approach to eating. So it's almost like a lazy version of a Western diet. So rather than having chicken, rice, and broccoli, which a typical bro would have, then
that's right.
It's like having a meat
tofu
substitute,
and
rice and broccoli. It's not going to provide you with those potential lost vitamins and minerals that you would otherwise be getting from combining a bunch of other different protein sources. So you're ensuring that you're hitting as a full spectrum of micronutrients as you possibly can.
Absolutely. And then in terms of like supplements, as you said, I mean, now that I eat probably like 10% of my of body fat, so I'm 3 months for the competition, so I lost quite a significant amount of weight, like 7 kilos in the last 6 weeks, and my food intake and my calories intake is not as high as some months ago. I started also supplementing, as you suggested, with like leucine, so like 2 or 3 times a day, 2 extra grams of leucine with every kind of a major meal. But is there any other supplements that you would recommend for a vegan or a person who would like to do bodybuilding as a vegan?
Yeah, there are. In terms of, let's get off the sort of the essential stuff at the minute. So more from a health and underpinning the performance. So protein can be corrected by using a spectrum of different protein sources, as well as like you said, using leucine with those key protein feed-ins to make sure that you're maximizing anabolism within those given feed-ins. One of the issues that you're facing now is because calories are becoming quite low. Essentially, you've come from 3,000 plus right down to sort of the 2,000 mark now. So essentially, your vitamin and mineral intakes decreased by a third, because obviously proportion to the amount of calories. So the need to supplement some some things are going to be there. Now, depending on your intake of things, so calcium for most Westerners get their calcium from dairy sources, and it's quite well absorbed in those sources. Obviously, for vegan, that's going to be a no-go. Calcium can be well absorbed in some vegan-based foods. So what the primary determinant of that is going to be the oxalates in those foods. So stuff like kale, bok choy, and broccoli, the calcium is quite well absorbed because they've got low oxalate content, which doesn't essentially bind with the absorption of the calcium. So stuff like spinach and rhubarb and other foods like that, which contain calcium, the actual calcium that you're absorbing into the system is going to be negligible. So if you are consuming a low amount of those low oxalate containing foods, then calcium supplement would be recommended, but it isn't essential. I think it depends on the diet, because it is still quite easily achievable with a vegan diet, even with reduced calories. If we look at iron, so it is, as you know, and as most of your listeners know, there's two types of iron. There's heme iron and there's non-heme. So heme's almost exclusively found in animal proteins, and it's got a high absorption rate of around 15 to 35%. So non-heme iron, which is found in both, it's found in animal as well as plant, but plant-based iron is pretty much pure non-heme iron, and that's got an absorption around 2 to 15%. And stuff like phytates found in grains and legumes can decrease the absorption of these, so you can get very minimal iron if you're consuming a lot of these types of foods. So for that reason, I think it's the Organization of Medicine, or I can't remember the exact name, recommend around 1.8 times the normal RDA for vegans, because of this potential reduced absorption, and close to 3 times for women. So it's worth, I wouldn't recommend iron off the bat. I would recommend someone get their iron levels checked before they supplement, but supplementation could well be a necessity.
Yeah, or eating food with vitamin C in order to increase absorption as well of iron. Vegan
carb. Exactly. Yeah. So stuff like there's inhibitors of iron absorption. So the phytates, there's polyphenols, and then there's enhancers as well. So like vitamin C and fruit juices, vitamin A, which can bump up that. So it's best consuming those non-heme iron sources either in isolation and then with some orange juice or an orange or some blueberries or something like that, and then consuming the majority of your grains and stuff at other time points, so you're not getting that interaction. So
that's right.
It's just one of those things where vegans be really careful with what they're doing, and the sort of level of diligence is going to be far greater than just a standard sort of carnivorous diet. So B12 is so the active form of B12, although a lot of vegans claim otherwise, is only found in animal products. Obviously, lacto-ovo vegetarians are fine because you can get it in eggs and dairy products. But vegans will either need to consume fortified foods with vitamin B12 or just supplement with it. So a basic B12 supplement will do the job just fine with that, and that's what you take. Zinc is another one that's potentially a concern for vegans. So it's mainly found in meat, poultry, and fish, and lower bioavailability in plant-based sources. So depending on levels, again, it might be worth supplementing. But I think for anyone starting or maintaining a vegan diet, it is worth getting bloods checked fairly regularly, maybe every 3 months for a sort of newbie vegan. But if you've been adopting that lifestyle for quite some time, then maybe once every 6 months to see if there's any sort of deficiencies occurring. And so they're the main health ones out of the way. So in terms of performance, so creatine is one I'd recommend for all strength athletes. And because creatine is predominantly found in animal proteins anyway, so like beef and chicken and so on. It's and fish to a certain extent as well. So it's pretty negligible in a vegan's diet. So your body's essentially losing. So one of the so I'm sure you're familiar with responders and non-responders when it comes to creatine. So a typical non-responder is someone who already has got a high creatine intake. So someone who eats a lot of red meat, for example. So vegans tend to respond a little bit better with creatine because their levels of creatine naturally are a lot lower. So creatine is one that will probably benefit vegans to a great, and although the research is quite mixed on the performance extent, whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or a carnivore, whether you're going to improve to a certain degree, but the sort of mechanism is there. Beta-alanine as well. So what beta-alanine does is raise levels of carnosine in the muscle. So what carnosine does is increase the buffering capacity, so the removal of hydrogen ions from the blood. So that essentially allows you to go a little bit longer without getting that burn, so that lactic acid burn, if you will. And carnosine is found in stuff like fish and turkey and stuff. So it's quite low in a vegan's diet. So again, something like beta-alanine would potentially be more effective for a vegan compared to a meat eater. So there are a couple of options to consider. Another one we talked about was a replacement for fish oil. So stuff like flaxseed obviously contains omega-3 in the form of AHA. Is it AALA, alpha-linoleic acid? And the conversion to the active forms DHA and EPA are quite low, something in the region of around 15%. Although for vegans, I'm sure the conversion rate's heightened just because of the pressure and to do so, because it's not going to be occurring in the diet. So your body sort of potentially regulates some pathways to get more out of it. So considering something like a DHA from algae is probably the best bet, and that's what you're doing currently.
Yeah.
So you're getting that purer, more effective form of the omega-3 in the diet. Apart from that, I can't really think of anything. Else. So we've covered like calcium, protein. And
that's it. I mean,
vitamin D is another one, but that's not going to be a vegan specific issue. The majority of vitamin D is made from the synthesis in the skin from sunlight. So there's very little in diet anyway. You could probably argue that vegans would probably get more than the average meat eater through the diet. So just a general vitamin D supplement, but that wouldn't be, again, a vegan-specific recommendation. That would just be a general recommendation across the board.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. No, very, very, very helpful. I mean, the other thing is that, as you say at the beginning, is about, vegan protein. So at the moment, I'm consuming a blend of, rice and pea protein, and also like some soy protein isolate. And of course, I mean, because my protein intake is pretty high compared to, my off season, because of my low carbs intake, then yes, I mean, probably a couple of times a day, I consume like a few scoops of protein powder just to reach my 180, 190 grams of protein. Otherwise, in off season, I, rarely consume protein powder, and I try to consume the majority of, I take the majority of my macros from kind of a whole food. And but this actually raises also another question that is one of the biggest concern also in kind of the vegan community, or people who are interested in turning vegan, but they have the fear of farting or fiber intake. So that's also one of the reasons why I consume at least like twice a day, protein powder, in order to don't have too much distress on my kind of intestine or my digestive system. Because of course, I mean, one of the biggest problem that could be actually one of the biggest benefit of turning into a vegan diet is consuming a higher amount of fiber compared to a carnivore or an omnivore or someone who's eat pretty much a very flexible diet. So in my case, when I turned vegan, I was coming from 2 or 3 years where my kind of a fiber intake was pretty high, even if my diet was a flexible diet, including also any type of animal products, because I used to consume a lot of veggies in any shape and form. Of course,
Yeah.
when I turned vegan, I started eating more legumes and pulses. But what I did was, conversely to what many people do, is that I gradually increased my fiber intake instead of jumping from 0 to 100 right away. And in this way, I kind of like help my body to adjust and microbiota to adjust to this new change of diet, and didn't have any problem in terms of like water retention, bloating, or digestive distress. But I don't know what the evidence says about that.
Yeah, it's I'm not too well versed in the evidence around the different fiber intakes. I do know that most carnivores probably don't get enough fiber, so generally going from a carnivorous diet to a vegan diet is going to be more beneficial in terms of the effects that come from fiber. So like colorectal health and so on, to name a couple of them. But yeah, so there is a risk to over consuming it, just in terms of not necessarily any clinical issue, but just general flatulence, the needing to go to the toilet more frequently. That they are sort of not massive concerns. It's probably more concerns for your partner than anything,
Yeah.
or your work colleagues.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's probably worth keeping it below around the 20-gram mark per 1,000 calories. So for someone who's on 2,500 calories, around 50 grams a day is about right. I think the recommendations are around 10 to 15 grams per 1,000 calories. So for the average person, around 30 to 40 grams, around 20 to 40 grams of fibre is what we're recommended. Although I think if someone stays below around the 60 gram mark, I don't think there are any issues going to occur there. I think if you're consuming way too much fibre, then that's going to potentially bind with vitamins, minerals, fats, and some amino acids as well, and decrease the absorption potentially of those. Although part of the increase to get to that fibre is going to be an increased consumption of vitamins and minerals anyway. So you could argue that
you balance it out.
It's not gonna matter too much. The issues tend to occur when people supplement with fibre, because essentially just consuming pure fibre, no extra vitamins and minerals, so they're basically just flushing out a lot of what they're consuming already, which is probably going to be very little. So
like fibre with supplement like psyllium husk or those type of supplements, you mean?
Yeah, I generally avoid fibre supplements. I don't think vegans would need to supplement with fibre anyway, because naturally it'd be quite high in their diet if their diet was good. So
yes,
yeah, mainly for meat eaters they potentially supplement, but even then they might as well just eat some oats, some more grains, some vegetables and some fruit to get that, rather than exactly, some beans, pulses and so on. So they could learn a thing or two from vegans and setting up their diets. And what I do find generally is that vegans have got a much more healthy diet than the sort of standard meat eater, and at least in terms of bodybuilders and athletes, because they are focused that little bit more on the diet. They think about what they're putting in their mouths, whereas the majority of people who even athletes, they don't really think about what they're consuming. And the most that a lot of bodybuilders think about their diets is just the amount of macros they're consuming. They just think, as long as I hit these macros, everything's going to be fine. And that's right up to a point, at least in terms of body composition. But then when you're talking about deficiencies creeping in and reduced calcium intakes, and that having a potential effect on bone health and things like that, and low vitamin D, and all these things over time can potentially cause issues.
Yeah, it's almost like an educational path or an educational journey as a bodybuilder as well. I mean, I remember when I started competing, my focus was just on calories and energy balance equation. Then I started thinking about macros, and now there's much more than macros. There's much more than protein. There are also micronutrients and all the kind of a good stuff that you find in veggies, or the stuff that you have regularly on a vegan diet. So yeah, I agree that I started gradually becoming more kind of attentive to, you know, the type of macronutrients and what I really put in my mouth every day. And just to close up a bit, the thing about the fiber, I mean, we discussed previously about peak week, and of course we're going to have another consultation when we get close to the competition. But one of the other things that you were mentioning to me before was that fiber can also increase water absorption. So probably it's not a good idea to consume too much fiber in the peak week, and actually limit the amount of fiber that week, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's I'm not too sure whether it'd cause water retention sort of subcutaneously, so what a lot of bodybuilders be conscious of. But what it would do is it would retain water in the gut, and just the presence of the fiber there would potentially make the gut protrude. And a lot of vegans, you see that if they are eating a ton of fiber, a lot of grains and so on, they almost get like a bit of a pregnant belly, like after big meals. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, and this comes from cycling and other weight making sports, is like a low residue diet. So by low residue, we mean foods that aren't going to stay in the gut for long. So stuff like fibers are going to be reduced. So most of the carbohydrate then would be coming from predominantly starch-based stuff like white rice, and with sort of minimal fibers, just so it's essentially then the pure carb that you absorb and using that for energy. So essentially what you're just carrying a lot less waste in the intestines, or a lot less food in the intestines as well. So your stomach ends up looking a lot flatter, which is obviously more aesthetic. And from the judge's perspective, and that could affect the sort of V-taper as well. So just from a physical perspective, not carrying less sort of food or waste in the gut region is going to improve that.
Absolutely, perfect. Sounds good. So your final, comment about veganism and bodybuilding. So it will be that, if I understood correctly, that you can do bodybuilding following a vegan diet, but you need to be extra careful about what you put in your mouth, and your nutrition, and just look at not just the macros but also the macronutrients. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's I don't think vegans are necessarily at a disadvantage from adopting a vegan diet, because in terms of bodybuilding, the success is going to come into how much muscle can someone build and how lean can they then get. That the muscle built is going to be determined by the training for the most part, and there's no reason why a vegan can't train as hard as anyone else, and a lot of them train harder, and some of the best athletes and are vegans, and just anecdotally, there's no reason why a vegan wouldn't do as well. And then from a diet perspective, it's going to be protein, the other macronutrients as well as micronutrients, and like we discussed, you can sort of cover those potential areas of weakness, or those gaps with sort of diligent attention to the diet, as well as potential filling in some gaps with the supplementation, particularly around the B12, and then potentially sort of zinc, calcium, and iron, depending on blood tests. And in terms of fat loss, that essentially comes down to energy balance and maintaining muscle mass with the training and sufficient protein. So there's no reason theoretically or from anecdotally that vegans would be at a disadvantage. So it's just going to require that little bit more effort. And for someone who's dieting properly anyway and paying attention to their intakes, they're going to be focusing quite a lot on the diet. So it's not going to be a ton of extra work to get there. So and you've managed it. So
let's see how it goes in the following weeks. For sure, I mean, with your expert opinion and supervision would be much easier, and we're gonna talk again soon, very in the following weeks, just to make sure that we are in line with the preparation. And again, thank you again for your time today, for the consultation, and also for this interview. I really appreciate it, and let's talk to you soon.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Fran. Yeah, it's good to speak to you as always.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Take care.
Take care.